The day had started like any other, or so I thought. The sun was warm, the air light with the smell of cut grass, and my children had decided we would all go into town together. They bustled around, loading bags into the car, talking over one another, the kind of easy chatter that families make when plans are simple and spirits are high. I stood by the porch steps, my cardigan wrapped tight around me, waiting for the call that it was time to go. The car doors opened and shut, laughter spilled into the air, and then I heard the words that landed like stones at my feet. "You'll walk while we all drive. If you don't like it, you can go back home." At first I thought I had misheard. Surely no one would say that to me, their mother, their grandmother. I gave a small laugh, uncertain, searching their faces for a glimmer of humor. But none came. They were already piling into the car, adjusting seatbelts, rolling down windows. "Wait," I said, my voice catching. "There's no room?" "There's no space," my daughter-in-law answered briskly, her tone sharp, dismissive. "It's just easier this way." The door slammed, the engine started, and they were gone. I stood there, my hand still lifted in protest, my heart stumbling in my chest. Dust rose on the road where the car had disappeared. For a moment, I felt the world tilt, as though the ground beneath me had shifted. I had raised these children. I had bandaged their scraped knees, sewn their clothes, sat awake through fevers, cooked meals from scraps when money was tight. I had carried them, again and again. And now, they would not carry me. I began to walk. The road stretched long and uneven, gravel biting into the soles of my shoes. The sun, so pleasant at the porch, burned hot against my back. My knees ached with each step, my breath shallow, but I pressed forward. What else could I do? Pride would not let me turn back, though each step cut deeper than the last. As I walked, my mind reeled with memories, my late husband's steady hand guiding me across crowded streets. His voice, gentle but firm. "You are never a burden." The ache of his absence pressed into me now more than ever. By the time I reached the edge of town, sweat clung to my temples, and my legs trembled. I sat on a bench outside the store, watching families step out of cars, laughing, holding hands. None of them walked alone. I pressed my palms together in my lap, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. The words echoed again and again in my head, cruel and sharp. "You'll walk. If you don't like it, go home." And though my body hurt, it was my heart that bore the heavier weight. The walk back home felt twice as long. My body was sore, my knees swollen from the strain, and each step echoed with the memory of their voices, sharp, careless, unthinking. By the time I reached the gate, the sun had dipped low, turning the garden shadows deep and blue. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The house greeted me with silence. Not the warm, comfortable quiet of a home at rest, but a hollow silence, empty and sharp. The tick of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, the creak of the floorboards beneath my shoes unsettling. I dropped my cardigan on the chair and sat at the kitchen table. The air smelled faintly of last night's stew, but it offered no comfort. My eyes went to the row of chairs around the table, each one empty, each one holding a memory. My husband's place at the head of the table, gone these 10 years. The children's laughter that once filled the room, long faded. I whispered into the stillness, my voice small. "What have I done to deserve this?" There was no answer, only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the wind against the windows. My gaze fell on the photo hanging by the doorway. The whole family together years ago, smiles wide, arms draped over shoulders. I remembered that day clearly, the picnic by the lake, the sandwiches I'd made, the sun shining in all our faces. In that frozen moment, I had felt rich beyond measure. Looking at it now, the faces seemed like strangers. I thought of my late husband again. He would never have let this happen. He had carried me, defended me, made me feel needed, cherished. "You're the heart of this family, Maggie," he used to say. Yet now, I felt like nothing more than an afterthought, a burden too heavy for anyone to bother with. I pressed my hands together, fingers trembling. A part of me wanted to believe it was just a mistake, that they hadn't realized how cruel the words had sounded. But deep inside, I knew. Words like that don't slip out unless they've been thought before. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. Crying into the silence would not change anything. Still, the ache in my chest was heavy, pressing me down. I felt smaller, diminished, as though the very walls of the house had turned their backs on me. I rose and moved through the rooms. The living room with its worn sofa, the bedroom with the quilt I'd stitched by hand. Each space carried echoes of love, but love that belonged to another time. Finally, I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of the day pressing in. The house, once a haven, now felt like a shell, empty, cold. And in that emptiness, I realized something that chilled me more than the silence. I was truly alone. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. My mind replayed the scene over and over. The car doors slamming, the dust rising, their laughter fading as I stood abandoned on the road. To quiet the noise in my head, I reached for the small box on the nightstand. Inside lay the things I could never part with: my husband's pocket watch, his wedding band, a handful of photographs curled at the edges from years of handling. I picked up the watch first. It no longer ticked, but when I held it, I swore I could still hear his steady heartbeat. I closed my eyes and remembered his voice. It had been deep, steady, reassuring, the kind of voice that smoothed storms before they even began. "You're never alone, Maggie," he used to say. "I'll always be right here beside you." But he wasn't. Not anymore. He had been gone for a decade, leaving me to walk this road without him. And now, even those who should have been my blood and bone treated me like a stray dog left to fend for itself. I traced the wedding band with my thumb, its gold dulled with time. How many times had I watched his hands, strong, capable, fixing a fence, lifting a child, reaching for mine across the table. He had never once made me feel small, never once let me believe I was a burden. Even in his last days, when sickness gnawed at him, he would smile and whisper, "You're my strength, Maggie. Don't forget it." The tears came hot, sliding down my cheeks. I pressed the ring to my lips. "Why did you leave me with them?" I whispered into the darkness. "Why didn't you take me with you?" The room gave no answer, only the faint groan of the house settling, the sigh of wind through the shutters. Yet in the quiet, I almost felt his presence. Not beside me, but within me. The memory of his devotion, his fierce protection, his unwavering love. I pulled one of the photographs from the box. It was the two of us on our porch years ago, arms entwined, my hair still dark, his smile wide. Behind us, the house looked alive, vibrant. Back then, it had been a place of warmth, not this hollow shell it had become. For a long time I sat with the photo in my hands, letting the memory steady me. He had loved me, deeply, fiercely, without condition. And though he was gone, that truth remained. As I finally set the picture back in the box, a thought stirred in me, faint but insistent. Perhaps I was not as powerless as they wanted me to believe. Perhaps the strength he had seen in me was still there, buried, but waiting. And maybe, just maybe, I could find it again. The next morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, the kind I made more out of habit than desire. The world outside moved as though nothing had changed. Sparrows darted between the hedges, the mail truck rumbled down the street, the sun spilled across the worn boards beneath my feet. Yet inside me, everything felt fractured. I thought I was alone until I heard a voice call out, "Morning, Maggie." It was Helen, my neighbor from across the street. She was carrying a watering can, her wide-brimmed hat tilted against the light. She was younger than me by a good 10 years, spry and sharp-eyed, but she carried her own share of life's burdens. I forced a smile. "Morning, Helen." She set the can down and came closer, leaning over the fence. "Haven't seen you around much lately. Everything all right?" The question was simple, but it landed heavy. I wanted to say yes, to brush it off, to hide the ache. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came. My silence must have said more than words, because her brow furrowed. "You look tired," she said gently. "Come over for tea this afternoon. I'll bake scones. It'll do you good for a moment." I hesitated. Tea. The very word twisted in my stomach, poisoned by recent memories. But Helen's offer was different. No hidden edges, no bitterness behind the smile. Just kindness. I nodded. "Thank you. I'd like that." She grinned. "Good. 3 o'clock. Don't be late." Then she picked up her watering can and moved back toward her garden, humming to herself. When she left, I sat a long while, staring at the empty road where my family's car had driven away the day before. The contrast struck me hard. Those who should have cared had turned cold, while someone with no blood tie offered warmth without asking anything in return. Later that afternoon, I walked across the street. Helen's house smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish. She ushered me in with the ease of someone who had been expecting company all along. We sat at her kitchen table, steam curling from our cups, scones warm and crumbly on a plate between us. At first, we spoke of ordinary things, the weather, her roses, the new neighbors who'd moved in down the block. But then she touched my hand lightly. "Maggie," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You don't have to tell me, but you seem hurt. If you ever need to talk, I'll listen." The kindness in her eyes undid me. For a moment, I could only nod, my throat too tight for words. When I left her house that evening, a little of the heaviness had lifted. The road back to mine didn't feel quite as long, or quite as lonely. It was the smallest beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. That evening, the house was filled with noise again. My son and his family had returned, their laughter rising up the stairs, the television humming, the sound of cabinet doors slamming as they prepared dinner. I lingered on the landing, listening, my heart heavy but restless. Helen's kindness that afternoon had stirred something in me, a longing to try again, to reach across the widening distance between myself and the people I once called my own. I waited until the dishes were set and everyone had settled in the kitchen. My son was scrolling through his phone, his wife stirring a pot on the stove, the children tapping at their tablets. They barely looked up when I entered. "Could we talk a moment?" I asked softly, my hands folded in front of me. My son glanced up, distracted. "About what, Mom?" I hesitated, feeling the heat of all their eyes, or worse, their lack of it. I took a breath. "About yesterday. When you left me to walk, I can't pretend it didn't hurt." Silence. Only the bubbling of the pot filled the air. Then my daughter-in-law gave a short laugh, sharp as glass. "Oh, that again. You're still upset about that?" "Honestly, it wasn't such a big deal. We told you the car was full." "But you didn't even try," I said, my voice trembling. "You didn't ask who could sit differently or if the children could share a seat. You just told me to walk." My son sighed, rubbing his forehead as though I were a nuisance. "Mom, you're making too much of this." "You got home fine, didn't you?" The words stung more than I expected. "It isn't about the walk," I whispered. "It's about what it meant." I felt unwanted. The children shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. For a fleeting second, I saw pity in my grandson's eyes, but he quickly bent his head back to his screen. My daughter-in-law's spoon clattered against the pot. "This is ridiculous. We do so much for you, and still you complain. You have a roof over your head, food on your plate. What more do you want?" I opened my mouth, but my son cut me off, his tone firm. "Mom, enough. You're tired. Let's not make drama over something so small." I stood there, stunned. Words crowded in my throat but refused to come out. My son had spoken to me as though I were a child, not the woman who had raised him through lean years and hard nights. Finally, I nodded, forcing my voice into steadiness. I understand. I turned and walked back upstairs, each step heavier than the last. In my room, I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart hollow. I had tried to reach them, and they had pushed me further away. The next morning, the house stirred earlier than usual. My son had already left for work, and my daughter-in-law clattered in the kitchen, sharp movements betraying her impatience. The children were still in their pajamas, sprawled across the living room with their tablets glowing in their hands. I moved quietly among them, not wishing to intrude. But as I passed, my youngest granddaughter looked up. She was 9, with hair that curled like springs and eyes too thoughtful for her age. "Grandma," she whispered, tugging at my sleeve, "did you get home okay yesterday?" The question stopped me. I crouched beside her, my knees protesting. "I did, sweetheart." "Why do you ask?" She bit her lip. "Because I heard what they said. About you walking. It wasn't nice." Her honesty cut straight through me, soft as a knife. I brushed a curl from her forehead and managed a smile. "No, it wasn't nice. But don't you worry. I'm all right." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I don't think it's fair. You're old, but you're still you. You shouldn't have to walk alone." I blinked hard, willing back the tears that threatened. To be seen, even for a moment, through a child's clear eyes. It was more than I had expected, more than I thought I deserved after last night's cold dismissal. "Thank you, darling," I whispered. "That means a great deal to me." Her brother looked up then, frowning. "Shh. Don't say stuff like that. Mom says Grandma is always complaining." The words stung, though not from his malice, for there was none. He was repeating what he had heard, parroting the careless talk of adults. My granddaughter glared at him, then squeezed my hand. "Well, I don't care. I like Grandma." Her words were defiant, fierce in their smallness, and they lit something in me, a spark I hadn't felt in days. Before I could respond, my daughter-in-law entered the room, her voice brisk. "Kids, put those down and get ready for school. And Mother, don't fill their heads with your sad stories, please. They've got enough to think about." I rose slowly, forcing composure into my voice. "We were only talking." She gave me a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "All the same." She herded the children out, her hand pressing a little too firmly on her daughter's shoulder. But as my granddaughter passed me, she glanced back, her eyes shining with quiet loyalty. It was just a flicker, a small rebellion hidden in a child's gaze. Yet it told me I wasn't invisible. Not to everyone. That night, when the house was still, I wrote in a notebook I had pulled from the back of a drawer. Day 1. She saw me. She cared. And that is enough to begin again. Dinner that evening was roast chicken, the kind I used to make on Sundays when the house was full of life and laughter. Back then, I would baste the bird with butter and thyme, my husband carving it with steady hands while the children jostled for the best pieces. The memory of those meals was warm, golden. Tonight's, however, was cold before it even began. I entered the dining room quietly, sliding into a chair at the far end of the table. My son sat at the head, my daughter-in-law at his side, the children between them. I might as well have been a guest invited out of duty. Conversation flowed around me, quick and careless. My daughter-in-law spoke of errands, of bills, of a neighbor she disliked. My son nodded, adding short replies, his eyes more often on his phone than on anyone else. The children whispered and giggled to each other, their plates filled, their glasses topped. No one asked how my day had been. No one asked if I wanted more than the small piece of chicken placed in front of me. I listened, silent, pushing food around my plate, my appetite gone. At one point, My grandson looked at me and asked, "Grandma, why don't you talk more?" Before I could answer, his mother snapped, "She's tired. Leave her be." Then, with a sharp smile in my direction, "You see, Mother, we don't want you overexerting yourself." I nodded politely, but inside, the words stung. I wasn't silent because I was tired. I was silent because there was no space for me at that table, not really. When the meal ended, my daughter-in-law gathered the plates, brushing past me as though I weren't there. My son leaned back in his chair, scrolling, while the children dashed off to their games. I rose quietly, gathering my own plate, but she took it from my hands. "Don't worry about that," she said briskly. "We'll manage." Her tone left no room for protest. I went back to my room, the murmur of voices fading behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed. The house was full, yet I had never felt so empty. For a long time, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The lines on my face told stories of years lived, battles fought, sacrifices made. Yet at that table, I had been invisible, my history erased. Finally, I opened the notebook again. My pen scratched across the page. Day 2. I sat at their table, but I was not family. I was a shadow, a stranger in my own bloodline. When I set the pen down, my chest ached. But beneath the ache, a seed of something else stirred. Not anger, not yet, but the faint beginning of resolve. I would not be erased. The next morning, I lingered in bed long after the others had left the house. The quiet pressed down like a weight. But for once, I welcomed it. On the nightstand lay the little notebook I had begun to write in. Its cover plain, its pages thin, yet it felt more alive than anything in that house. I opened it, the ink from last night still fresh, and touched the words with my fingertips. I was a shadow, a stranger in my own bloodline. Reading them back made my chest tighten, but it also reminded me that I still had a voice. Even if no one at the table cared to hear it, the page did. So I began to write. Slowly at first, then with urgency, as though the pen itself pulled the truth from me. I wrote of the walk they had forced on me, of the ache in my legs, the bitterness of their laughter fading down the road. I wrote of the silence in the house, the way the walls seemed to swallow my presence. I wrote of the photo on the wall that showed smiling faces I no longer recognized. Page after page filled, each word stitching me back together. It was as though I had been disappearing, little by little, and the act of writing drew me back into focus. When the family returned that evening, I tucked the notebook beneath my quilt, safe from their eyes. At dinner, they spoke of schoolwork and bills, of the car needing repairs, of a cousin's birthday. I sat quietly, nodding where expected. But inside, I was already planning what I would write later. That night, I returned to my room and poured out more. Day 3. They don't ask, they don't listen. But here, on these pages, I exist. Here, my voice is clear. Here, I am not invisible. The more I wrote, the more I remembered myself. The woman I had been when my husband was alive, when my children were small. I remembered laughter in the kitchen, songs sung over dishes, the warmth of belonging. That woman was still in me, even if they refused to see her. One evening, as I was writing, my granddaughter slipped into the room without knocking. She startled me, standing at my side, her curious eyes falling on the notebook. "What's that, Grandma?" she asked. I closed it gently. "Just my diary." "Do you write about us?" A small smile tugged at my lips. "Sometimes." She leaned closer, whispering as though sharing a secret. "I think that's good. People should listen to you more." Her words settled warm in my heart. When she left, I opened the notebook again and added, Day 4. She sees me. Perhaps the future is not entirely lost. For the first time in many days, I slept without tears. It happened on a Saturday morning, the kind of day that used to mean family picnics and long drives when my children were young. The house buzzed with energy, Doors opening and shutting, laughter bouncing off the walls, the clatter of shoes hurriedly laced. I stood at the edge of the hallway, cardigan buttoned, purse in hand. I thought, foolishly, that this time they would include me. I had even slipped a sandwich into my bag, just in case the outing stretched long. I waited, smiling faintly, though my heart pounded. "Where are you going?" I asked when they finally streamed past me, arms full of coolers and bags. "To the lake," my son said quickly, already halfway out the door. I gripped my purse tighter. "The lake? That sounds lovely. I'll just get my hat." But before I could turn, my daughter-in-law stopped short, her face tightening. "Oh, Mother, it's not a good idea. The walk from the parking lot is too far for you. You'd tire yourself out. I can manage," I insisted softly. "I'd like to come." She exchanged a glance with my son, one of those silent conversations couples have when they're of one mind. He gave a small shrug, not unkind, but indifferent, as though my presence made no difference either way. "There really isn't room in the car," she said briskly, echoing the cruelty of days past. "We're packed as it is. Better if you stay home and rest." The words landed heavy, yet delivered so casually, it was as though they hadn't considered their weight. "Maybe next time," my son added absently, already lifting the cooler into the trunk. And then they were gone again. The door shutting, the engine starting, the car pulling away, laughter trailing behind. I stood there in the silence, purse clutched tight, the sandwich still tucked inside. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked small, forgotten. I set the purse down slowly, carefully, as though it were something fragile that might break. I made my way to the veranda, sitting alone with the sandwich I had packed for myself. The garden hummed with bees, the lilacs bending under the weight of blossoms, but the beauty of it all only deepened the ache inside me. I opened the notebook, the one that had become my confidant, and wrote with a firm hand, "Day 5. They left me again. Not even asked. Not even considered. As though my desire to be with them has no place in their world. I am a guest in my own family, and they are the hosts who decide whether I may join." Tears blurred the ink, but I let them fall. For the first time I felt something shift. Not just sadness, but anger, quiet and simmering. If they would not see me, I would find a way to make myself seen. The following week, I woke to a bright sky, the kind of blue that calls you outside whether you feel ready or not. The house was empty. My son at work, my daughter-in-law out with friends, the children at school. Silence, thick and heavy, filled the rooms. For a long time I sat with my coffee, staring at the clock. The thought of another day spent alone in this house made my chest ache. Then my eyes fell on my purse, still resting by the door from when I had tried to go to the lake with them. Inside, the sandwich wrapper remained folded, untouched. I stood, slipped on my shoes, and picked up the purse. For once, I would not wait for permission. The walk to town was slow. My knees ached, and I had to pause at each corner, but the air felt fresh, the breeze steady. By the time the market came into view, the hum of voices and the smell of baked bread lifted something in me. The stalls brimmed with color, baskets of peaches glowing in the sun, jars of honey catching the light, bunches of flowers spilling from wooden crates. I lingered by a stand of tomatoes, and the woman behind it smiled warmly. "Lovely day, isn't it?" she said, placing a plump tomato in my hand. "Sweet as candy, I promise." Her friendliness startled me, but I managed a nod. "It is a lovely day." I bought 2 tomatoes and a loaf of bread. At the next stall, a man selling jars of jam pressed a sample spoon into my hand. "Try this. Blackberry. Best in the county." The taste was rich, tart, alive. As I moved through the rows of stalls, strangers greeted me with smiles, with nods, with kindness so simple it almost broke me. No one told me I was in the way. No one sighed at my slowness. I was not invisible here. At the flower stall, a little girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, She reminds me of Grandma. Her words caught me like a thread, tying me briefly to a memory I had thought lost. The mother smiled at me, and I found myself smiling back. By the time I returned home, my arms were full. Bread, jam, flowers, and a heart lighter than it had been in weeks. I set the items on the kitchen table, arranging the flowers in a glass jar. The room seemed brighter, warmer, touched by life again. That night, I wrote in the notebook, Day 6. I went to the market alone. Strangers smiled at me, spoke kindly. For the first time in so long, I felt human again. Not a burden, not a shadow. A woman among people. I closed the book, my hand steady. And I realized, perhaps my world did not end at the walls of this house. The next time I went to the market, I lingered longer, not just for the food, but for the voices, the color, the warmth. I carried my purchases carefully, pausing often to rest, when a voice called after me. "Excuse me, ma'am." I turned to see the woman from the tomato stall hurrying over, wiping her hands on her apron. She smiled brightly, her cheeks flushed from the sun. "I couldn't help noticing you the other day," she said. "You remind me of my mother, God rest her soul." We have a group that meets on Thursdays, just a few women from town. We share coffee, swap recipes, sometimes just talk. You should come. Her invitation startled me. I clutched my bag tighter. "Oh, I wouldn't want to intrude." "Nonsense," she replied, waving her hand. "The more the merrier." We meet at the church hall at 10. "Just bring yourself?" I nodded politely, though doubt lingered. I hadn't been part of any group in years. My life had shrunk to these walls, these routines, this family that no longer wanted me close. Still, her smile stayed with me as I walked home, tugging at something in me that longed to be seen. Thursday came. I stood at the mirror that morning, debating. My hands smoothed my skirt nervously, my heart thudded in my chest. At last, I wrapped a scarf around my shoulders and set out, notebook tucked into my bag like a secret companion. The church hall buzzed with laughter when I arrived. A long table stood covered with mugs, cookies, and a steaming pot of coffee. Women of all ages filled the room, their voices overlapping in warmth and familiarity. "Come in, come in," the tomato seller called, beckoning me. "Ladies, this is Maggie." I felt every eye on me, but not with judgment, with welcome. They made space at the table, poured me coffee, pressed a cookie into my hand. Within minutes, I was listening to stories of gardens, grandchildren, aches, and joys. When it came my turn, I hesitated. But then, slowly, I spoke of the market, of the walk, of how I had once filled my house with family but now found myself more alone than I had ever expected. The women listened. They nodded. One reached across to squeeze my hand. "Oh, honey," she said softly. "Families can be cruel. But you found another one here." The words brought heat to my eyes, but this time the tears did not feel bitter. They felt like release. By the end of the morning, I was laughing with them, trading recipes, even jotting down a hymn suggestion in my notebook. That evening, back at home, I wrote, Day 7. They welcomed me. They saw me. For the first time in years, I belonged. And in the silence of my room, I smiled. The first time they noticed, it was subtle. My daughter-in-law caught sight of the flowers in the jar on the table, the ones I'd brought back from the market. "Where did those come from?" she asked, her voice clipped. "I bought them," I answered simply. Her brows lifted, surprise flickering into irritation. "With what money?" I felt my cheeks warm, but I kept my tone even. "With my money. A few dollars at the market." She said nothing more, only pursed her lips and turned away, but the tension lingered like smoke. The second time, it was sharper. I had returned from the Thursday circle of women, my scarf still smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon cookies. My son was in the living room scrolling through his phone. "Where were you?" he asked without looking up. "At the church hall." A gathering. His head lifted then, his eyes narrowing. Without telling anyone? I didn't think I needed permission, I said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the flick of his thumb against the screen. Just don't wear yourself out, Mom. And don't expect us to come pick you up if you can't manage the walk. I nodded, swallowing the sting. But inside me, something hardened. I had managed just fine without them. The real clash came days later. Dinner was nearly over, the plates half cleared, when my daughter-in-law spoke. "You've been out a lot lately, Mother," she said, her tone laced with suspicion. "The market, the church, neighbors. It's unusual. Is something wrong?" I set down my fork, meeting her gaze. "Nothing is wrong. I simply needed fresh air. And company." She leaned back, arms crossed. "Company? You have us." The words nearly made me laugh, though the bitterness of it caught in my throat. "Do I?" I asked softly. My son looked up sharply, his expression pinched. "Mom, don't start." "I'm not starting anything," I replied, my voice firmer than I intended. "I'm only telling the truth." The children had gone quiet, their eyes flicking between us. My granddaughter watched me with that same small loyalty, her lips pressed tight. My daughter-in-law's voice sharpened. "We give you a home, a place at our table. And you go off gallivanting like a teenager? What exactly are you looking for?" I sat straighter, surprising even myself with the steadiness in my tone. "I'm looking for kindness, for respect, for the feeling of belonging, things I no longer find at this table." The silence that followed was thunderous. My son's fork clattered against his plate. My daughter-in-law's mouth tightened, words unsaid burning behind her teeth. I excused myself and left the room, my heart pounding, my legs trembling. But once upstairs, I opened my notebook and wrote with a steady hand, "Day 8. They noticed. They are angry, but so am I." For once, I did not swallow the words. I spoke them, and I will again. The morning after our clash, the air in the house was brittle. My daughter-in-law moved through the kitchen with clipped footsteps, banging pots louder than necessary. My son avoided my eyes, keeping his attention fixed on the newspaper. Even the children whispered instead of laughing. The house had become a stage, every gesture deliberate, every silence a performance of disapproval. Later that day, my son knocked at my bedroom door. He stepped in without waiting for an answer, holding his hands behind his back like a schoolboy rehearsing a speech. "Mom," he began, "we need to talk." I closed my notebook carefully and set it aside. "About what?" He hesitated, then sighed. "About all this. Going out. The market, the church gatherings, the neighbors. You're not as young as you used to be. It's not safe for you to be out wandering around." "Wandering?" I repeated, my eyebrows lifting. "I don't mean it badly," he said quickly. "But people talk. And you're not—" He stopped, fumbling for words. "You're not strong enough anymore." I drew a deep breath, fighting the tremor in my hands. "I'm strong enough to walk to the market, strong enough to sit with women and share coffee, strong enough to live." He rubbed his forehead. "Mom, please. You don't need to do these things. You have us. Stay here, rest, enjoy your home, enjoy my home." The words felt bitter. What enjoyment was there in being ignored at their table, dismissed when I spoke, told to walk while they drove away laughing? Still, I kept my voice calm. And what harm have I caused by stepping outside these walls? His jaw tightened. "It's not about harm. It's about appearances. About keeping things simple." "Simple for whom?" I asked. His silence was my answer. That evening, my daughter-in-law joined the effort. She cornered me in the hallway, her voice low but sharp. "You're stirring things up, Mother." "The children notice. They hear you complaining, see you sneaking off. It confuses them." I met her eyes steadily. "It's not confusion. It's truth. her lips pressed into a thin line. You need to think about what's best for everyone, not just yourself. I almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. For everyone? Or just for you? Her cheeks flushed. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut and turned away. That night, I wrote in the notebook until my hand cramped. Day 9. They want me small again, silent, invisible. But I have tasted freedom, and it is sweeter than fear. I will not go back to the shadow they prefer. I closed the book, my pulse steady. The pressure to conform was real, but so was the strength awakening inside me. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I had gone to the market again, stubbornly ignoring my daughter-in-law's sharp words from the night before. The air was heavy with heat, the kind that presses down on your shoulders until every step feels doubled. I carried a small bag with bread and apples, nothing more, but by the time I reached the corner of our street, my legs were trembling. I told myself I could manage. Just a few more steps, just to the porch. But as the sun bore down, my vision blurred, the world tilting like a picture frame knocked askew. I reached for the fence, my fingers scraping wood, and then the ground came up hard and fast. When I opened my eyes, the sky swam above me. My breath came in ragged bursts, and then a voice, urgent, worried. Maggie! Maggie, can you hear me? It was Thomas, the widower who lived 2 doors down. He was kneeling beside me, his gardening gloves still on, his brow furrowed with concern. Yes, I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper. Don't move, he said firmly. He glanced around, then shouted toward another neighbor's house. Call an ambulance. Panic fluttered in my chest. No, I rasped, clutching his arm. Please, not the hospital, just help me inside. He hesitated, torn between duty and my plea. Finally, he nodded. With surprising gentleness, he lifted me, one arm steady at my back, the other supporting my arm. My legs wobbled, but with his strength, we reached my porch. Inside, he settled me into a chair, fetched a glass of water, and pressed it into my hands. His eyes scanned my face, worried. You scared me half to death. You need looking after? I sipped the water slowly, the coolness steadying me. Thank you, Thomas. It was just the heat. Heat or not, he said, folding his arms. You shouldn't have been alone out there. The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. When my family came home, they didn't notice the apples on the counter or the weariness in my body. They didn't ask where I had been or how I was. But Thomas noticed. That night, I opened my notebook, my hand still weak but steady enough to write, Day 10. I fell today. Not one of them was there to see it, but Thomas was. A neighbor, not blood. He saw me, helped me, worried. What does it mean when strangers care more than your own? The ink bled slightly where my hand trembled, but I didn't blot it. I let it stand, proof of my frailty, yes, but also of my truth. I closed the notebook slowly, whispering into the quiet. I am not as alone as they think. The days after my collapse passed in a haze. I moved slower, careful with each step, though I told no one what had happened. My family didn't notice, or perhaps they chose not to. Life in the house carried on, their conversations looping around bills, work, and school schedules, never once circling back to me. It was my granddaughter who broke the silence. One evening, as the dishes clinked in the sink and the television blared from the living room, she slipped into my room. Her small hand pushed the door shut, her eyes wide with something between curiosity and concern. "Grandma?" she whispered. "Yes, darling?" She climbed onto the bed beside me, her knees tucked under her dress. "Why don't you ever come with us anymore? To the lake, or to the store, or anywhere?" Her question struck like a blow. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. I wanted to tell her everything. The sting of their words, the long walk home, the silence that had grown like a wall between us. But how could I? She was just a child. Instead, I reached for her hand. "Sometimes," I said softly, "grown-ups don't see things the way children do. They forget that everyone wants to belong." She frowned, her little fingers curling around mine. "But you do belong. You're my grandma." The simplicity of her truth unraveled me. My eyes filled with tears and I pulled her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "Thank you, my dear. You don't know how much that means." She leaned back, her brow furrowed. "When I grow up, I'll never leave you behind." Her words cut and healed in the same breath. Hope stirred in me, fragile, fleeting. Yet sorrow followed, heavy as stone, because she was still a child, and children grow into adults who forget promises made in whispers. Just then, my daughter-in-law's voice called sharply from the hall. "What are you doing in there?" "Homework. Now." My granddaughter squeezed my hand one last time before slipping away, her small shoulders squared as if carrying a secret too big for her age. Alone again, I sat with the echo of her words. "You belong. You're my grandma." I opened my notebook, the pen shaking in my hand. Day 11. Today she asked why I am never with them. A child sees what adults ignore. For her, my place is clear. For the others, I am furniture, silent, unmoving, unseen. The question burns. How did my own blood forget what even a child knows? I closed the book and set it aside, pressing my hands to my chest. The ache of sorrow was sharp. But beneath it, a new thought whispered. Perhaps I was not powerless after all. It was a Friday evening, the end of a long week. The table was set with spaghetti, garlic bread, and salad, the kind of meal I once made to stretch $1 and still keep everyone full. But now I was only a quiet figure at the far end of the table, serving myself what was left after the bowls had passed between them. The conversation moved quickly, full of laughter and complaints about work, stories about school, and my daughter-in-law's grievances with neighbors. I listened, as always, on the margins, until I realized they were speaking about me, not to me. "She's been out again," my daughter-in-law said, her fork waving like a pointer. "The market, the church. People are starting to notice. It doesn't look right." My son grunted in agreement. "Mom, you really should stay home. You'll get hurt out there. You're not young anymore." I set my fork down, my heart pounding. For weeks I had swallowed their words, scribbled my pain into the notebook instead of letting it spill aloud. But tonight, something in me shifted. My granddaughter's question still echoed inside me. "Why don't you ever come with us anymore?" I cleared my throat. "If I stay home, it's because you don't take me. If I go out, it's because I have to find life for myself. What exactly do you want from me? To vanish into these walls until I'm gone altogether?" The table went still. My son blinked at me, as though I had spoken in another language. My daughter-in-law's lips curled into a tight smile, brittle and sharp. "We just don't want you to embarrass yourself." "Or us embarrass you?" My voice rose, trembling with something fierce and long buried. "By buying flowers? By sitting with friends? By daring to breathe outside this house?" The children froze, forks halfway to their mouths. My grandson's eyes darted nervously, but my granddaughter sat straighter, watching me with quiet pride. "You're overreacting," my son muttered, though his face had gone pale. "No," I said, my hands flat on the table. "I've been silent for too long. I am not a piece of furniture. I am not a burden to be hidden. I am your mother, your children's grandmother, a woman who has lived and loved and worked harder than you can imagine, and I will not be erased." The words spilled out, hot and unstoppable, shaking the air. No one spoke. Even the television in the other room seemed to hush. Finally, I rose from the table, my legs trembling but steady enough to carry me upstairs. That night, My notebook bore the truth in heavy strokes. Day 12. I broke the silence. They looked at me as though I had grown teeth. But I will not retreat. The breaking point has passed, and now I will live louder. The following Thursday, I returned to the church hall. The circle of women greeted me with open arms, as though I had always belonged there. Their laughter filled the room, their stories weaving together like threads in a quilt. I listened, spoke when I could, and for the first time in years, I felt part of something larger than my own solitude. After the meeting, as we gathered our things, Helen, the woman from the tomato stall, approached me with a sparkle in her eyes. "Maggie," she said, "a few of us are going to the next town over this Saturday. There's a craft fair and a pie contest. We thought you might like to come along." The words hung in the air, both thrilling and terrifying, an invitation, a place at the table of life, offered freely. "I wouldn't want to impose," I murmured, though my heart was already beating faster. "You wouldn't be imposing at all," Helen said firmly. "We'd love to have you. We'll take the van, plenty of room. All you need is yourself." I hesitated only a moment before nodding. "All right. I'd like that." Her smile widened. "Good. 10 o'clock sharp. Don't make us wait." That evening, back at home, I felt a nervous excitement buzzing through me. I mentioned it casually at dinner, testing the waters. "I'll be going out on Saturday," I said, spearing a piece of salad. "Some friends are taking me to the craft fair." The silence that followed was heavy. My son frowned. "Friends?" "Yes," I said, meeting his eyes. "From the church group." My daughter-in-law's fork clattered against her plate. "You're leaving with strangers?" "Out of town?" "They're not strangers," I replied evenly. "They're kind women who thought to invite me." And I said yes. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not wise. What if something happens? You're not—" "I am not helpless," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "And I will not sit in this house waiting for scraps of attention. I've been asked, and I've accepted." My son looked as though he wanted to argue, but I held his gaze until he looked away. That night, in my notebook, I wrote, Day 13, an invitation. A simple thing, yet it feels like sunlight after a long winter. They do not want me to go, but I will, because life waits, and I will not keep it waiting any longer. When Saturday came, I dressed carefully, a clean blouse, my husband's old brooch pinned at the collar, as though carrying a piece of him with me. For the first time in years, I felt not like an afterthought, but a woman stepping into her own story again. The van pulled up outside my gate on Saturday morning, laughter spilling out before the doors even opened. Helen waved from the passenger seat, her hat tilted at a jaunty angle. "Come on, Maggie. We've saved you the best seat." For a moment I froze, clutching my purse. It had been so long since anyone had waited for me, called out my name with joy instead of impatience. Then I climbed in, the smell of coffee and perfume surrounding me, the warmth of voices rising in welcome. The road stretched before us, fields flashing by in green and gold. I listened as the women swapped stories, teased one another, and sang along to an old tune on the radio. Slowly, I joined in, my voice rusty but alive. Laughter bubbled up from me, startling even myself. At the fair, the world was alive with color. Stalls lined the street, quilts hanging like banners, the scent of fried dough and cinnamon drifting on the breeze. Children darted between booths, music played from a fiddler on the corner, and everywhere was motion, joy, belonging. Helen tugged me toward a table piled high with pies. "You have to try the apple. It's my favorite." I tasted it, the crust flaky, the filling warm and spiced. For a moment, I closed my eyes, and it was years ago again, in my own kitchen, my husband laughing as he stole a piece of pie before it cooled. The day unfolded like a dream. We browsed crafts, admired paintings, and I even bought a small knitted shawl, soft blue, warm against my shoulders. I hadn't bought something for myself in years. At lunch, we sat on benches beneath an oak tree, sandwiches unwrapped, stories flowing as easily as the breeze. The women asked about me, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity, and I found myself telling them pieces of my life, of the farm my husband and I had built, of raising children with little money but plenty of love, of the silence that had crept into my days now. They listened, really listened. "You're stronger than you know, Maggie," one of them said, her hand covering mine. The words warmed me more than the sun. By the time we drove home, my arms were full. A jar of honey, a pie wrapped in brown paper, the shawl around my shoulders. But my heart was fuller still. When I walked back into the house that evening, the air inside felt colder, heavier. My son looked up from his chair, his brows drawn. "Long day?" he asked, suspicion in his tone. "Yes," I said simply, meeting his gaze. "A good day." That night, in my notebook, I wrote, Day 14. I lived today, laughed, ate, spoke, was heard. I remembered who I was, and no matter how heavy this house feels, I will carry that memory like a lantern in the dark. It was bound to happen. The walls of the house had been trembling for weeks, each small clash building toward something larger, unavoidable. The spark came on Sunday evening, after I returned from the market with a bouquet of sunflowers tucked under my arm. I placed them in a jar on the kitchen table, their golden heads brightening the dim room. My daughter-in-law stared at them as though they were weeds. "More flowers?" she said sharply. "Really, Mother, do you think this is your house to decorate?" Her words landed heavy. My son looked up from his paper, frowning, but said nothing. The children glanced between us, wide-eyed. I took a breath. This is still my home. I've lived here longer than anyone at this table. My daughter-in-law's mouth twisted. Your home? It's our home now. We take care of you, feed you, give you a place. The least you could do is show gratitude instead of parading around town like some social butterfly. Something in me broke then, not in weakness, but in strength. I rose from my chair, my knees trembling, but my voice clear. Gratitude? I said. I gave my youth to this family. I raised children in this house, cooked every meal, patched every torn shirt, worked until my hands were raw. And now, when I ask for nothing but respect, you tell me I should be grateful? My son stood, his face tight. Mom, please, let's not. No, I interrupted, my hand shaking as I pointed toward the door. For too long I have been silent. You left me on the road to walk alone. You've shut me out of your lives, treated me as though I were invisible. But I am not invisible. I am not done living. The words echoed through the room. My granddaughter's eyes shone with tears. My grandson shifted uncomfortably. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms. So what then? You'll just run off with your little friends and embarrass us further? I straightened my shoulders. Yes, I will go with them. I will laugh and sing and breathe outside these walls. I will not shrink myself to fit the small space you have left for me here. Silence fell. My son's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no words came. For the first time, they all seemed to see me, not a frail old woman, not a shadow, but someone who stood tall in her own truth. I turned then, walking to my room with slow, steady steps. I closed the door behind me and opened my notebook, the pen firm in my hand. Day 15. Tonight I said the words I had buried for too long. They cannot silence me anymore. I belong, not because they grant me a place, but because I claim it myself. I set down the pen, my chest rising with a strength I thought I had lost forever. It has been months since that night, the night I finally spoke the words that had been pressing in my chest like stones. The house is quieter now, though not in the way it once was. Silence used to mean emptiness, a void filled with nothing but the echo of my own thoughts. Now, silence feels like space. Space I have claimed for myself. The family still lives here, still moves around me with their routines and chatter. But something has shifted. They watch me differently, not always with kindness, but with a wary respect they had long denied me. My son hesitates now before dismissing me. The children glance my way more often, as if wondering what else their grandmother might say when she chooses to speak. My daughter-in-law keeps her distance, her lips pressed tight. But even she cannot erase the sound of my voice from that night. And I? I am not the same woman who stood by the porch that day, told to walk while they drove away. That wound still lingers, but it is no longer an open gash. It is a scar, a reminder, yes, but also a mark of survival. I go to the market each week. I sit with the circle of women, laughing until my sides ache. Sometimes we sing, sometimes we argue. Always we belong to one another. They are not my blood, but they are my family in the ways that matter most. Helen often teases me about the way I light up when I arrive. "You look 10 years younger, Maggie," she says. And perhaps I do, because life has crept back into me, stubborn and bright, like grass pushing through a crack in the pavement. The notebook remains on my nightstand, pages filled with sorrow, with anger, with truth. I still write in it, though now my words are different. Less about what was taken, more about what I am building anew. Day 50. I laughed today, out loud, with no one shushing me. I ate pie at the fair and didn't care about the crumbs. I walked home with flowers in my arms. I lived. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream of my husband. In those dreams, he stands at the gate, waiting, his hand outstretched. And when I wake, I imagine him smiling at me, proud that I have found my strength again. They once told me, "If you don't like it, go home." And in a way, I have. Not to the house where I am barely tolerated, but to the home I carry within myself. A place of dignity, of friendship, of quiet courage. I walked that road once, abandoned and humiliated. But now, I walk forward on my own terms, and this time, I am not alone.